for today. Is it recording? It should be. Yeah. For today, we have a very long list of things, but I'm not sure if it's going to take a long time. It depends on the amount of questions. And we're going to talk only about Git. But then, of course, there is this thing of what is Git and what is GitHub, and we kind of already discussed a little bit before, but I'm going to go through the whole thing again.
Yes, thank you.
Because I also understand, like in the beginning for me, it was also very weird, like why we have a tool and then we have a platform and then we have, like it might become a bit, I don't get it. But the idea, Git is a tool that it's open source, is developed by the community, and you can go here. Anyone can contribute to it. I mean, I wouldn't say that you should try to contribute to it because it's a really hard tool to contribute to it because it works. It's really good. So it's not that they need a lot of help with it. But yes, it's open source. Anybody can use it and anybody can contribute. And for instance, when you see here people who are using it, this is very, very silly because basically everyone is. This is not only these companies are using it. No, everyone, every freaking one that has a website is using Git somehow. Because again, Git is a tool. And GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket is a platform. And what I told the guys before, you can see, it's not the same thing, don't quote me on that, but you can imagine, for instance, JavaScript is a tool and React or Node is a platform that they use JavaScript. So it's the same thing. GitHub and GitLab use Git. That's why they have it on the name, basically. And the big difference is that GitHub, for instance, is a company and they have a server and they allow you to put your code in their servers by using Git to manage it. Now, the idea of Git, and not only of Git, because again, in here it says all these tools, maybe we should dim down the lights, maybe it will be easy to see. Did it turn off? It's kind of on.
Slow motion.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Now it's better.
It's a bit better. Yeah. Just don't fall asleep.
Yeah.
So yeah, the as you can see here, there is a lot of these tools written here: Subversion, CVS, whatever. So all these tools try to solve the same problem, and the problem is that when you're coding alone, you own the entire project, right? So you can always do changes to it, and you don't care because nobody else touches your project. But if you're working in a team and you do a part of the code and another person does another part of the code and another, there has to be a way to actually make sure that things still work. And when we put all the code together, then it's like, oh, now we need to spend like hours trying to figure out like, oh, you need to change this, you need to change that, you need to change that. So these tools came up to actually make that easier so that people can do the changes and I can see the changes that you're doing, and then will they conflict? Like, am I doing something that makes your code break? Because that's really important to know, otherwise things that should just go crazy, basically. And again, that's what version control means. And these two words might be means everything, because again, you also know about versions when you see when you update an app, right? There is version 1, version 2, version 3. So these tools can also be used for that. Can also be used, for instance, when you're building a web page, or let's say on the React homework. So we had week 1, week 2, week 3. You could imagine that would be a version 1 of your project, version 2 of your project, version 3. And how can you keep track of those? By making a different commit or a different merge or a pull request per version. Then you can see like, oh, on a version 1, this is how the code looks like. On a version 2, this is how the code looks like. And this is really good to actually, something happened, like the website broke. The website right now is broken. Why? When did that happen? So you can go to Git and see like, oh, on last Sunday, I made this change, and this was the change that broke the whole thing. Oh. And that's why these tools also exist. So that, again, it's not to blame. And actually, there is a word on Git. There is a word called blame, where you can see who did what. But it's not like as a punishment type of thing. It's just to understand, because sometimes like let's say we are all working on a project, and I tell you, like, you make the header, and you make the footer, and you make the body of the content. But when I tell you to make the header, I tell you, like, oh, it should have the menu. And then when I tell you to do the footer, it should also have the menu. But maybe, like, I did it wrong, but you didn't know. So the code that you built, at the end, it was wrong. And then you can always say, like, oh, but this person, like, I got these requirements to build this, and I did it. And on this day, this person did these requirements. So, like, which one should it be?
Yeah.
So it's more about, like, not pointing fingers, but more about understanding why. What's the cause of it? And that's why that word blame, it's fun, because I mean it is there, and so it's a bit fun, but it's not like in a scary thing. No, people usually don't blame each other for those type of things. So yeah, as I mentioned here, for the part of what is Git, technically it's a tool that helps you creating a history of your project, of your code, and it creates the history. It doesn't do the history by itself. You are the one that has to make commits and pull requests. So it's not magical, like you do the things, but it helps you keeping track of those things, and it helps you versioning your code as well. So creating versions to say, like, this is acceptable, I'm gonna call this version 1. And then you can still be working on it. And then when you get to another point, like, oh, now it's very different, so I maybe should be called version 2. But if you one day want, like, oh, I don't like this version anymore, I want to go back to version 1, with 2 or 3 clicks on your GitHub, you can do it. And imagine if you have a document on your computer, try to do that. Like, you cannot remember what you did, like, last month or whatever. So this helps a lot, like going back and understanding, why did I do this? Why did I did that? So that's basically what Git is. Then of course we have GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. There might be more, I don't know, but these are actually the ones I've worked with, basically. So again, GitHub, as you know, you create an account and you can have as many repositories as you want with projects inside. You can see other people's projects as well, if they are public or not. And there is this interface where you can see, like, for instance, this is a repository. Actually, it was the one we did a long time ago, 8 months ago, so we can see here. And yeah, this is basically how it looks like. There is your name, the name of the project. Then there is a bunch of stuff here that we won't go through everything because that will take forever. But because again, each platform, as I say, like, they are companies, right? So they build their platform based on what they want to give to their users. So when you say, like, oh, but GitHub and GitLab is the same thing, it does the same job, but it's not the same thing, because even sometimes some names are a bit different. For instance, in GitHub, you have a pull request, which means you make a change, you push to a branch, and you say, like, oh, I have this request to merge to it, but it's called a pull request. On GitLab, the same exact thing is called a merge request. And to be honest, I think GitLab is right, because you are actually requesting to merge. You're not requesting to pull. But again, it's just words. And sometimes, like, if you're new to a system, like, oh, I really understand GitHub, and then you got a job and they're like, oh, we have GitLab. And you're like, shit, I do not know GitLab. But you do. You just don't know the words. But like, the whole system is the same. It's just like, on this one, you need to click here. On the other one, you need to click there. On this one, it says push. On the other one, it says something else. So it's just like that. Yes.
So as a part of the team, I request, or I make pull request after I make my code and I upload. I ask for the admin or the owner of that project, or who is like.
Usually on teams, the way that it usually works in Denmark, at least, I don't know other countries, is that you have a development team, and usually you have 1 or 2 senior developers that, let's say, it's not that they know more, but they have more responsibility within the team. And the idea is you do your code based on your task. You get a task, you do your code, and then you make a pull request to say, like, can somebody look at it and give me notes, like, do I need to change this? Do I need to change that? And people might say, like, oh, this function, you don't need it because we actually already have it on our code. Then use this function. But that's not like, it's not your superior that's going to say that. It's the team. Because the team knows the code, or should know the code, and should own all the responsibility of keeping that dialogue. And sometimes that happens within the pull request, like when people comment on your pull request. Sometimes that happens face to face. For instance, if I'm working and my colleague is right there, I tell them like, oh, can you look at my pull request? And then you can say like, oh, maybe change this or change that. And then I go change, push again. And then if everything's okay, then we merge.
And everybody in the team can see your pull request?
Yes, everybody should. I mean, if you work in a team that people say you should not have access to this, you should always question why. Because if it's the project of the team, everybody should have access to all the pull requests to see at least one. Also because you can understand what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah,
and you make comment you make for me in my project. You
yes.
send for me? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's also for people to understand, like, let's say I'm working on this part of the project, and when it's a small project, it's easy, but when it's a big one, I'm focusing on my thing, right? Because it's my work. But part of my team is doing something else. So I can actually, by looking at their pull requests, I can understand what's going on. I can understand like, oh, you guys are doing this because the business needs this, you know? So that brings also a lot of knowledge sharing. Like you don't need to constantly talk about what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm working on this. I don't need that. I can see your pull requests. I can see exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, okay.
So that brings a lot of value to it. Some people do not like that, but I mean, I think that's really good, especially when you're new in the company, for instance, and you can actually see what people are doing. You can see like all the pull requests that happen even before, because after it being merged, you can still see the history of things like, oh, you did this, that, okay.
And you can learn actually.
Yes, you can learn because it's also like, instead of a huge amount of code, it's going to be small pieces of code. For instance, I can show something here because from time to time I play around with stuff. So I can see here, this is all my pull requests on my own project. Nobody else worked on this, only I worked on this. But I also like to keep myself, like to understand what did I do here. Because again, I haven't worked on this since August. So now if I look at this project, I won't remember. I'm like, oh, what did I don't know what I was trying to do here. So I can very easily, like in here, I'm on my pull requests and on the closed ones because they were already merged. They're already part of the big code. So I can say here, navigation component, like, okay, I did something here. What did I do here? File changes. And I can see exactly what I did.
Okay.
So I can see like, oh, I wrote all this code here. Cool. And I wrote it because I wanted the navigation component. Okay, cool. Now I know exactly what happened here. And I don't need to understand the whole project. So again, I mean, to be honest, this is very, very powerful. Like the tool that you can do these type of things. It's really, really good. And again, then of course there is GitLab, which is, it's another version of Git. Like it's another company. They are also really good at it. And Bitbucket. And I have nothing against Bitbucket. It's just I did not like the experience of using it. That's just it. I think GitHub makes things a bit more normal. The good thing of Bitbucket is that before they were the only ones that had private repositories for free. So if you don't want to pay, if you are a single person, like you are, like, oh, I want to have a couple of projects, but sometimes I don't want to have public. I mean, sometimes you don't want to have things public. So Bitbucket was the only one that had it free. But now GitHub also has it free. I don't know how many projects you can have, but I think you can have a lot of them private, free, which means that once I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm quitting Bitbucket. I don't need this tool anymore. But again, it also uses Git. It's the same concept. There is pull requests, there is code reviews, there is comments. All that exists in all the tools. Yeah, before we go to that one, because before we will learn how to use this, like, and again, this is how to use Git. Now it's not how to use GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. Because you installed Git at some point, and you installed this. You did not install GitHub. Soon, GitHub is going to have their own command line, which I just saw that post today. So GitHub is going to have their own thing, which is okay. But again, it's not a requirement. You don't have to use their own thing. You can always use Git. And I like to be very traditional with this type of things. So I'm always very skeptical with the new stuff. I'm like, I won't try it until 2 years from now, when it's like stable and everybody is using it. Yeah. Because in the beginning, when you try stuff and then you cannot do what you usually do, I always get really mad at that stuff. So I'm going to keep using Git no matter what. Now, again, Git is a software, is a piece of software that you install on your machine. And then that brings us to command line and commands. And when you see movies, and usually hackers in movies are always using command lines, right? Like to write stuff because it's cool.
It looks so smart.
But again, a command line or user interface, because in here you can see the command line there, and this VS Code is a user interface. But basically what happens behind the scenes is commands, because the machine understands commands, like your computer. So every time you save, or you delete a file, or you add a file, something is happening on your computer that triggers those commands to the machine. So writing those commands yourself is exactly the same thing. For instance, whenever I go, let's say here, Accurate Future, whatever, Accurate Future Git, maybe. Whenever I say new folder, and then a new folder got created, right? Now I have a new folder called temporary. When I go here, I have a new folder called temporary, right? If I do it through this button here, now I have another folder. But if I do this, I also have another folder. So we just saw 3 different ways of doing the same exact thing. But all of them actually behind it, I mean, they did not really use this command. They probably used something very internal, whatever. But you could imagine that all of them somehow wrote to the system the same word, saying make a directory. And that's what this means, make directory. So, and that's a big difference of using a command line or a user interface. Because usually command line, you will see it as CLI. It's spelled like this, which is command line interface. And then you have other things called
GUI.
GUI, which is graphical user interface, right? Yeah. Which, again, behind the scenes, they talk to the same point. It's just that one is visually, like one the person can like click, does this, does that, drag and drop. The other one, you need to write the commands. And whenever you install Git through this tool, that installs the command line of it. Some of them also install like some GUI things that you can see here. But I think this you have to install it separately. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm a big fan of the command line. I really like it. I tried GUI things for it, but I didn't like it at all. I could not work with it. So, and I really like the command lines also because I know the commands, like I know what to type all the time. And again, the command line usually uses this called bash, that it's written there. And again, that's another thing because bash is internet, come on. It's basically like something where you can run all these commands, everything that you want to run on a computer. So some of the commands I'm running here, for instance, this make dir is not from Git, is from bash. This works in every machine. You don't have to have Git installed to run that command. But if I want to write, maybe I'll zoom in this a bit. No. If I want to write Git, whenever I write it, it actually shows like how to use it. You have to use Git and then one of these. It's for a beginner this might be really hard to read, but once you get used to commands, then this is basically how to document. For instance, when you go to, let's say here, usually you have a help here, right? And somewhere there's going to be a how to use VS Code. Basically, this is the command line version of that. Is how to use things. So you can see here, like there is some documentation, how to start, how to work, how to examine, and then you always need to write Git and then the option of the command, like Git commit, Git add, Git pull, Git push. And you can see here, like git add adds file contents to the index, right? Git pull fetches data. Like, again, this is the documentation of how it works. I think it's help, isn't it? No. Oh yeah, but it's a very small documentation. For instance, the make the directory, the one that creates a new folder. That's basically what they tell you, like how to use it. Well, you write make dir and then the name of the directory you want, because I mean there is not a lot of options for this, so it's a very small documentation.
I think this BV, if the directory not there, it's make all the link or the path.
Yeah.
BV forced to do it.
But again, when you have a clean computer, for instance, you just bought a new computer or you got a new computer or you clean your computer completely, there is no software installed, Git is not there by default because it's not a tool for every user to have. But all the other commands that the computer needs to run, they're all there because they have to exist so that the computer can run. And that's the big difference because, again, whenever I write something related to Git, I always write the word Git first and then something else. And when it's internal commands, I usually just write those commands. For instance, make dir or clear, and then just cleans the whole thing. So that's, I'm not sure if you know the one to navigate into the directory, the CD, and then you put the name of the directory, like another. Now we are inside of the directory called another. Also, the way that this looks is because mine is customized. Because usually when you have on your computer, probably you see the full path here of where it comes from, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I don't like to have that, so I customized my own, and that's, don't ask me how to do that because that's not easy.
No, I was about to ask that, Marco. I'm preparing myself to ask you that.
No, I mean I can actually find a place where you can basically build your own how you want it to look, and then you need to basically copy a huge amount of code and paste it somewhere on your machine that it generates that. So basically that's what's happening here. I have something behind the scenes doing this. And again, these are the Git, the command lines and the commands. And the Git commands, as I said, help, yeah. The Git commands, you can always see them by asking for help. But again, usually the ones that you're going to use is git pull, and git pull pulls all the changes. I actually need to do something. I completely forgot about that. This won't work here because the library internet is terrible. It's not secure, so it doesn't let me connect to to my Git. So I need to connect to a hotspot. Yeah, okay. So now if I run git pull, it said that everything is up to date because everything is up to date. But then you have the command git add, and git add, if you say git add, you have to specify what you want to add, like what file exactly. But if you do git add dot, then it adds all the files. This just means add everything. For instance, that's basically what they say here. Maybe you want to say git add dot. And if you want to say that, that means it's going to add all the files to Git. And then, of course, you have the Git commit. That then you need to say -m, which means message, usually, and then a quote with the message inside. We will run all these commands once we will actually connect with the Git itself. Now I'm just showing what you can do. And then, of course, at the end, you have your git push that basically pushes all the changes. And that brings us to the next point, which is like all this pull, push, and add, what exactly does it does? Because there is two things that happens on Git, local and remote. And for that, I'm going to try to draw. So you have, let's say, this is GitHub. GitHub. Amazing. And you have your project here. You have your, I don't know, site, whatever. Site. This is going to be fun. And this is basically, when I show this page, this is basically what you're seeing. Like, I have my repository here, and I have those two files, README and git.js, right? This is a very small repository here. And that's basically what I have here at this point. And this is on the internet. This is in, okay, W. This is amazing. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it's in your machine, right? This is on the internet. It can also be on your machine, and that's when the local and remote might come a bit confusing. So usually, whenever there is something on GitHub, for instance, when you copied the homework to your repository, you did a git fork. You probably clicked this button here, fork. And that basically makes a whole copy of that repository to your account. And this basically, it's between accounts. As technically, it doesn't really have much to do with your way of working with Git. It just means like, oh, your project, I want to work on it. So I'm going to fork it so that I don't directly touch that project. I have my own small version of it. But once you have that own small version of it, you still need to be able to work on it. And that's what we're talking about, is you already have it on your GitHub. So basically what happens here is that you clone, right?
Yes.
You write, maybe I could use the text.
Git clone.
Amazing. So basically you, can I move this around? No. It's okay, right? It's okay. So you clone it. And when you clone, what's happening is that now you have your site, your project, on machine local. So basically now, by doing git clone, what you did is that you copied exactly what's here into your machine. Just saying like, oh, whatever is on my Git project here, I want it locally. And together with it, whenever you do that, and now if we look at our code here, and if I close this one, yeah. So there is this folder, which is basically the folder that I have on my GitHub. When I said git clone and then the URL for it, it just downloaded everything that I had there. Now I should maybe actually delete all this stuff. I don't need them here. Yes, okay. Basically it copied the git.js and the readme.md that you can see there. I have a notes.md because it's the one that I just wrote. Basically, it's the one that we're looking at. But this one, git.js and readme, these are exactly the same as these ones here, because we cloned them.
So,
yes.
First you make fork to your folder in GitHub, it's online, and then you clone it.
You don't have to do fork. You only do fork if you want to copy the project of someone else. Okay. If it's your own project, you can just create directly there.
Okay.
You can just say here, new repository. And this creates a new project for yourself. And then you need to clone it. And clone means a copy to my machine, not between machines. It's a copy for myself. And that's basically what I have here. So, but in here on VS Code, you cannot really see visually, but behind the scenes, and again, this is the folder where we are here. And now the commands I'm running is the machine commands that, for instance, I'm just listing everything that is on this folder. And because I'm using a Mac, this always gets created on Macs. You can ignore this DS store. It's a Mac specific thing. And then I have my README, and I have my Git, and I have my notes that I created. But then I have this .git thing. And this .git is actually a folder. So you can actually go inside of it. And now in here, there is a lot of stuff. Can we go to info? yeah, I mean, this type of information is a bit crazy. So just to look at it, this is, oh yeah, we have the logs here, maybe. Get logs. Yeah, it's not that readable. But for instance, inside of our Git folder, we have something called logs. And now this basically just tells, give me everything that is inside of these logs. And I want to see what it's there. And what's there is all this stuff, all these numbers and whatever. And this is basically the way that Git works. It creates a lot of IDs so that it keeps track of what's happening, basically. And you should not care about those IDs. What you should care about is like, this is exactly what happened. And this is exactly how it happened. So I cloned it, and then I made a commit, then I made a pull, then I commit again, then I commit again. So everything that I've done, like with my code, is here. So now if we go up, and in here we are in our Git folder, on our project folder. You should never touch the .git folder. Actually, if you delete that folder, then you basically need to start a new Git project on your machine. And I will show what happens when we do that. Now, basically, what I want to do is this file that I created, these notes, I wanted on my website. I want it here, because as you can see here, I have these two files, but I don't have the notes. So when there is this Git status that basically gives you the state of like, well, what's the status of the changes and everything. And as you can see, like there is two files here that are not being tracked by Git, and one is the Mac thing, which I will remove. So if I run Git status again, yeah, now it's just the nodes, right? And that's exactly the file, like that's the change I'm doing right now. I want to add the nodes to it. So again, if you always try to read what happens when you write Git something, it's very, very useful. The documentation is really, really good, because it always tells you like this is an untracked file, which means that Git does not know what this file is about. And it's like, do you want to add it? Well, what do you want to do with it? Like, it's on your project, so probably you should do something about it. So now I'm going to add the file. And if I do this, or if I do this, it does exactly the same thing, because I only have one file now. So if I would have more files and I want to add all of them, you don't have to specify the name of each single file.
Okay.
But if you don't want to add all of them, then you need to specify which ones you want to add. That should not happen on your daily life, but sometimes it might. So I'll just do this, git add. Now, I mean, nothing, I mean, you didn't saw what happened, but now if we run git status again, and this is a command you have to run a lot of times, because it's basically, again, it's a status. You should know, like, you want to know what's going on, what's happening. So now our git status looks a little bit different, because now it says, oh, changes to be committed. There is a new file, which means that Git now knows about this file. But, and that's why I'm saying the word, Git knows about this file, but GitHub doesn't. Because again, Git is the tool, GitHub is the platform. So all this is happening locally. And that's why you need to push eventually, so that it goes to the remote. And that's the big difference at this step here, local versus remote. Everything we've done so far is locally. It's in our machine that's happening. And because we have Git installed, Git can handle all these things that's happening, but it will, for instance, we can do this without internet connection because we don't need any external stuff. So basically here, what says like, if you commit something, then this file will go on your commit, this new file. So now I'm gonna commit and put a message saying notes file. Now, when you write git add, usually you don't get anything back. Like you don't get any notification of what happens. But when you write git commit with a message, usually, I mean, a lot of it, this might not mean anything to you. So, and then it shows back like this is the message we added. But in here, it shows good information because it tells you how many things changed on this commit. So for instance, we only had one new file, but if we had 300 files, in here it would show like, oh, you just added 300 files, your commit. And if you run status, you might think like, oh yeah, that everything is done. But as it says there, and this is a very important thing to understand. So it says your branch is ahead of origin master by 1 commit. What that means is that your local, like what we have on your machine now is ahead of what's on GitHub. Because as you can see here, our machine has these 3 files. But on GitHub, no matter how much we refresh, there's only 2 files there. So now when we run the git status, because Git keeps all the history that happened, it knows like, oh, the last time you pulled from the website, there was only these 2 files. Now there is one more, so there is a difference. And what it tells you here as a note, basically, like, you should probably do this. It tells you like, you should push to actually publish your changes that you have locally. Sometimes you might not want to, because you might say like, oh, it's not ready to go to GitHub, and that's okay. Again, that's why this is not it's a recommendation, what you should do, not what you have to do. And whenever you run git push, and now this one is the one you usually need internet connection, because this is the one that tries to push stuff. And as you can see here, like a lot of stuff happened, and it even showed the speed of how fast is happening and whatever. And now, for instance, if you run git status again, it says that everything is up to date, nothing to commit, and the working tree is clean. And basically that means that there is no changes from one to the other. And now if we go here,